Georgia's Republican governor was met with boos at the state's Republican convention this weekend. Governor Brian Kemp's address focused on recently passed voting and abortion restrictions. But for the crowd, the focus remained on 2020. He was repeatedly interrupted by loud jeers over his refusal to overturn the presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. Unlike some fellow GOP officials who have publicly denounced the former president, Kemp narrowly managed to avoid a party censure. For more on this, let's bring in political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Greg Bluestein. Hi there, Greg. Good to see you again. So some Republican governors, like Arizona's Doug Ducey and Maryland's Larry Hogan, continue to face criticism for denouncing former President Trump's baseless claims of election fraud. What is different about Governor Kemp?
Well, Governor Kemp is walking a very narrow line in Georgia because the former president, has vowed to campaign against Brian Kemp. He has vowed to oppose his reelection efforts. But at the same time, he has yet to endorse any of the two primary challengers to Brian Kemp. And Brian Kemp is playing it differently, too. While other state elected officials who have gotten on Donald Trump's wrong side in Georgia have attacked the former president, Brian Kemp is avoiding doing that. He is not saying a single mean word about the president. Instead, he's talking about what the law allows him to do and what it does not allow him to do. And in his view, the law did not allow him to try to illegally overturn the election results in Georgia.
So Kemp officially launched his reelection campaign last month, but faces a primary challenge from former Democrat turned Republican Trump supporter Vernon Jones. Does Jones or anyone else pose a credible challenge to Kemp?
Yeah, Vernon Jones is not right now seen as a serious challenger to Brian Kemp because, as you mentioned, he only switched parties just a few months ago, and only last year did he endorse Donald Trump. And so he's got a voting record full of votes that are very tough to explain to a Republican conservative base, including a vote against Brian Kemp's anti-abortion heartbeat bill that was maybe one of his signature legislative accomplishments. But at the same time, Vernon Jones is trying to reinvent himself as a far-right conservative, and in doing so, he's pulling Brian Kemp and the rest of the field further to the right of the party. And so you've now seen Governor Kemp take a series of steps to try to placate, to curry favor with the Republican base that is, at best, a little bit skeptical of him right now. He has banned vaccine passports. He has opposed the critical race theory. He ventured down to the U.S. border with Mexico a few weeks ago. So he's doing a lot of things that are meant to, firm up the Republican base in Georgia and also fend off, if not Vernon Jones, maybe the threat of another Republican challenger who could still get in, because there's always talk that someone more formidable could enter the race with some money behind him or her.
Well, meanwhile, Georgia's Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger was censured at the GOP convention over the weekend, although he did not attend. But he will be running for re-election next year. So, Greg, what is Raffensperger's involvement with the review of Fulton County ballots from the 2020 election?
Yeah, I think that the election involving Brad Raffensperger in 2022 will be one of the, if not the premier down ticket race in the nation, will be one of them, because it will be completely shaped by Donald Trump. Former President Trump has attacked Brad Raffensperger relentlessly and blamed him in part for his election defeat, just as he's attacked Governor Kemp. And right now, Brad Raffensperger is trying to walk the same narrow line. He's still critical of former President Trump. At the same time, he has welcomed a further analysis and review of election results that just a few months ago he repeatedly said were upheld by upheld by multiple tallies and counts of Georgia votes. So he's trying to walk the same line because Brad Raffensperger is facing challenges from multiple Republican candidates, including Congressman Jody Hice, who is endorsed by former President Trump and who is the front runner in this race. And Brad Raffensperger's situation is so desperate that he wasn't even invited to speak by his own state party's convention. And had he come down to Jekyll Island where the convention was held, he would have assuredly been booed. And he knows it. And so he's in a really tough spot right now, trying to win back Republican supporters while fending off pro-Trump allies who are nipping at him.
Yeah, it sounds like an extremely difficult position to be in. Also, freshman Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene did not attend the GOP convention, yet a number of attendees expressed support for her. Now, she's been stripped of committee assignments and chastised by party leaders. What is behind her support in her home state?
Yeah, she might have gotten the loudest applause of anyone at the Republican convention, even though she wasn't there in person. She had a video message where she blasted Democrats, establishment Republicans, and the media and got a roaring ovation. She remains one of the most popular figures among the Republican base, as divisive as she is to the broader electorate. She still continues to be a very popular Republican with the grassroots. And I was at one of her events just a few days ago, up in near her, in the heart of her territory in Dalton, Georgia, where a few hundred people showed up and gave her roaring applause for every sort of punchline, every sort of attack line that she had against Democrats. She's raised millions of dollars, which is clearly not the typical role for a freshman congresswoman. And even though she's been stripped of her committee assignments, she still has a very loud megaphone on social media and whenever she goes and gives speeches in Congress.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Greg, I know we have to go, but I mean, for the establishment Republicans in Georgia, how are they receiving all this?
Yeah, it's a headache for a lot of the established Republicans because, you look at Governor Kemp. You can call him establishment. He's the state's first lifelong Republican governor. And he's made a series of very conservative moves. And now he's been questioned he's being called a rhino, right? So some of them feel like they just can't win. So they're trying to win, but it's clearly a good sign for Democrats going into 2022 because Democrats in Georgia are going to be united behind Raphael Warnock. And if Stacey Abrams runs like we think she will for governor, they'll certainly be, by and large, united behind her while Republicans continue the infighting.
Wow, certainly interesting dynamics there in Georgia. Greg Bluestein for us. Greg, always great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.